Apple said it would allow media apps to create in-app links to sign-up pages on those companies' websites, allowing the likes of Spotify and Netflix to bypass the iPhone maker's cut of subscriptions.
The Apple thing is really big news because it kind of goes to show you that you had a pretty progressive legislative framework in South Korea. I don't think it's particularly a huge market for Apple because most of the app activity, I think, is Android more than it is Apple. But they basically just seeded the market, and by deciding to basically conform to this law, then they started with these reader apps and allowing payments, allowing
just so
you to link
people
down. It's the beginning of the beginning for the app stores to be deconstructed and opened.
Well, I think Chamath has kind of said this at the beginning of the end. I think there's some truth to that. Look, I think the root of this is the fact that Apple has this 30% rate on any in-app purchases. And like Bill Gurley said, it's a rake too far, right? Just because you can charge 30% doesn't mean you should charge 30%. Ultimately, this is why the whole ecosystem has been up in arms. They formed an industry coalition to challenge Apple. That resulted in a lot of legal challenges, lawsuits, and a lot of these companies like Spotify and Tile, they testified against Apple in hearings. So I think this 30% rake has ultimately backfired on Apple. It's created a huge backlash, and now they're paying the price. They've already had to roll it back for these so-called reader apps. So, if what you're doing is buying a subscription to, say, Netflix will now be able to redirect you to their website. You can buy it there and then consume the content, on your iOS app without Apple getting a part of the split. But this now opens the door for this type of thing to apply to games as well, where there's a lot more in-app purchases, like Fortnite, right? So I just think this is a case where, what's the old line that pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered? Apple has been a hog and now it's getting slaughtered.
Yeah.
By the way, I want to point out, this is a really interesting experience of the free market. Clearly consumers and the developers in the App Store ecosystem were vocal and angry enough that this behavioral change from Apple, the structural change, kind of came to bear. It didn't require regulatory intervention. I just want to point out how important and relevant that is, that
yes,
having
the
regulators,
market is functional.
The market is functional, and having the government and regulators come in and people complaining to the Senate about Google and Apple monopolizing them out of their businesses ultimately gets resolved when there's enough kind of collective mass from the consumer/partner that says to the big incumbent player, we're not going to play by these games anymore. Don't you think this is a nice win for the free market?
Yeah, I do. Well, look, I don't think monopolies are, I don't think letting monopolies do whatever they want is free market, okay? I mean, monopolies end competition. They will squash innovation. They will, basically get in the way of permissionless innovation. So I'm in favor of reining in these monopolies. And the two big issues, I think, with Apple and Google, well, Apple especially, is number one, sideloading of apps. So the idea that they have total control over what apps get loaded onto your iOS device. People want the ability to create alternative app stores. That already exists for Android, right? So I think that is coming for Apple.
I think monopolies are good, because monopolies are just lazy, and it's easier to innovate and compete against a monopoly, to be honest, than it is to compete against cronyism. When there's kind of embedded kind of government regulation that prevents emerging competitors from competing effectively, it's a lot harder to win than against some slow, big, uninnovative monopoly. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, here's the counter argument. So I agree with you that big, slow, lumbering monopolies can be great to compete against. But here's the problem. When they control access to an ecosystem, when they're gatekeepers, that's the problem. Because now you have to go to them, and they're going to be slow, lumbering, and stupid in terms of allowing you to innovate. And when they see you becoming a threat, they'll squawk you. That's the problem. If these guys didn't control platforms, that would be one thing. But they control the most important platform there is, which is the operating system. So I just think that, this is Microsoft and Windows all over again.
Well, I mean, I think what it is sort of like it's in this migration to being a really interesting software business and a luxury good business. And it's trying to figure out how to navigate that and how to manage the brand and how to manage, how to sell $1,000 devices that have certain capabilities. But when you take a step back and actually look at that phone and compare it to a Pixel or the next generation Samsung, what you see is frankly the same product. And so what it has is brand. It has a sense of differentiation. And that's no different than Louis Vuitton or any other luxury good that you're willing to pay a premium for that may not really bear the cost of it if you look at the actual raw materials that go into it. And so they are going to have to make a really interesting transition because they're going to have to figure out how to land more of these iPhone 10s where, people like us are willing to pay $1,000, but what does that leave behind? And I think what it leaves behind is a market that's going to get consolidated even more by folks like Xiaomi or Samsung on the low end.
So it's $1 trillion company, probably.
It definitely bleeds into that category because now you're just talking about, another 12 or 15% accretion from where they are. But the question has always been what do you do with all this money? What do you do with this scale? And especially
in Ireland, I think, too.
Unfortunately, so far that's all they've done. And if you repatriate it, what should they be buying, if anything? I mean, I still think Tesla, Netflix, these are the businesses that Apple should be in the business of owning, just because it has so much operational leverage for them.
Do you think they will? Meaning once the tax policy shifts?
No. I think that they have funded, look, I mean, they've spent more on their building, quite honestly, than they have in any sort of major feature or product launch. So this is
talking that it's something between $1 billion and $5 billion.
I think it was a $10 billion campus or something. I mean, look, the point, they probably spent more to figure out how to curve the glass than, So they're at a point in time where I think they're being stewards. They need a generational transition where now people that are a little bit further divorced from the Steve Jobs legacy can take over those businesses, and then you'll either see it flounder or just completely go nuclear in a rocket ship. And we need that moment to come at some point.
How do you judge Tim Cook's leadership then?
Oh, I think he's been a great steward, but I think he's operated, like I said, again, as an outsider just looking at it, as not wanting to push the envelope too much by accidentally denigrating Steve's legacy.
But what do you
Probably the right thing to do in that situation.
Yeah, and frankly, you look at Microsoft, it's roughly the same thing where Ballmer tried the best he could, now slightly different circumstances, obviously, and then you needed a transition to someone like Satya.
I think that Tim Cook would say, look at the stock price, look at the market share, look at the revenue produced over the last.
None of those things I take away. What I'm saying is, has there been visionary product leadership? And I think what instead they've done is they've managed a business well that has been given to them.